The morning sun cast a golden glow over the city, lighting up the busy streets of downtown Chicago. People hurried to work, students rushed to school, and the usual hum of life filled the air. Maria Thompson walked with steady steps, her coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. She had taken the day off from her duties as a senior FBI agent, something she rarely did. Wearing a light jacket, jeans, and her hair tied back, she looked like any other young woman enjoying a quiet morning walk. Maria had grown up in this neighborhood and knew every corner, every shortcut, and every face that belonged here. She was proud of where she came from, but she also knew the struggles that came with it, especially when dealing with law enforcement. She had seen how some officers abused their power, how fear was used as a weapon against the innocent. But today, she wasn't on duty. Today she was just Maria, trying to enjoy a peaceful Sunday. As she turned onto a quieter street, the sound of a slow-moving car caught her attention. She glanced to her right and saw a police cruiser rolling beside her at a crawl. The driver's window rolled down and a familiar voice called out. "Hey there," said Officer James Callahan, his tone rough but pretending to be friendly. He was a tall man with a thick mustache and eyes that didn't match his smile. "You look like you're having a rough morning." Maria gave him a polite nod but kept walking. "I'm fine, thank you." Her voice was calm, showing no signs of concern. Callahan chuckled and kept driving slowly alongside her. "You sure? This part of town can be dangerous for someone like you." His words carried an edge, not quite a threat, but not far from it. Maria stopped walking and turned to face him. "Officer, I appreciate your concern, but I assure you I'm perfectly safe." She tried to keep the conversation short, hoping he would move on. But Callahan stepped out of the car and blocked her path. He stood tall, using his size to intimidate. "You know, protection doesn't come free around here," he said, leaning closer. "For a small fee, I could make sure nothing happens to you." Maria blinked, surprised but not shaken. Was this officer actually demanding money? "Protection money?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's illegal, officer." "You know that, right?" Callahan smirked, clearly amused. "Who's gonna believe you over me? You think people will take your word over a badge?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Hand over $200 and I'll leave you alone. Otherwise..." He let the sentence hang in the air, giving her a knowing look. Maria stayed calm, though inside she felt anger rising. This wasn't just corruption, it was cowardice. He thought he could scare her into paying just because he wore a uniform. She reached into her pocket slowly, pretending to get her wallet. "Fine," she said, keeping her voice even. "Let me get that for you." Callahan's grin widened. "That's a good girl," he said, clearly pleased with himself. But before he could react, Maria moved, not with violence, but with sharp control. She pulled out her FBI badge and held it up, in front of his face. "Agent Maria Thompson," she said firmly, "senior field agent, and you are under investigation for attempted extortion." Callahan's smile vanished instantly. His eyes darted around, realizing the crowd had started to grow. Some people were recording the scene on their phones. Others whispered among themselves, unsure of what to do. "You think this is a joke?" Maria continued, her voice cold. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Callahan's hands clenched into fists, panic flashing in his eyes. Then, without warning, he reached for his gun. Maria reacted faster. With trained precision, she twisted his wrist and pushed it away before delivering a quick, powerful kick to his knee. He staggered, pain shooting through his leg, but Maria didn't stop. She grabbed his arm and forced it behind his back, pushing him down onto the pavement with practiced ease. "I am placing you under arrest for attempted extortion, assault, with a deadly weapon and misuse of authority," she said clearly, pulling his cuffs from his own belt and locking them around his wrists. The crowd gasped and murmured in shock. A few people clapped, others shouted in support. Someone yelled, "Get that crooked cop!" Maria stayed focused, speaking into her earpiece. "This is Agent Thompson. I need backup at 12th and Main. Suspect in custody." Within minutes, Sirens wailed in the distance. Other officers arrived, confused by the sight before them. One of their own cuffed and lying on the ground, glaring at Maria with pure hatred in his eyes. She stood tall, holding her badge high. "This officer tried to shake down a civilian and pointed a gun at her," she said, addressing the arriving officers. "He's lucky I didn't shoot him myself." The officers nodded, professionalism taking over as they took Callahan into proper custody. One of them approached Maria with a serious expression. "We'll handle it from here, Agent Thompson." Maria gave a short nod. "See that you do." As the officers loaded Callahan into a squad car, reporters began arriving. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved into her face and questions flew at her from all directions. "Agent Thompson, can you tell us what happened here? Did you expect this kind of behavior from a fellow officer? Do you believe this was an isolated case or part of a larger issue?" Maria took a deep breath and faced the cameras. "What happened today was unacceptable," she said firmly. "This officer abused his position of trust and power. He threatened an innocent person simply because he believed he could get away with it. But he was wrong." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This isn't about me, it's about justice. Officers who break the law must be held accountable. No badge gives anyone the right to harm or exploit others." The video of the incident quickly went viral. Within hours it was trending online, shared across social media platforms and news channels. People praised Maria as a hero, calling for stricter oversight of police conduct. Others expressed outrage, sharing their own stories of mistreatment by law enforcement. Back at the FBI headquarters, Maria sat in a meeting room with her team. They reviewed the footage, analyzed statements, and prepared for the legal battle ahead. Callahan's actions had opened a door to a much bigger problem, one that many had suspected existed but lacked proof to expose. Over the next few weeks, Maria worked tirelessly, leading an internal investigation into Callahan's past. What they found was shocking: evidence of bribes, threats, and a pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals for personal gain. More names surfaced, more officers were implicated, and soon the entire department was under scrutiny. Maria didn't seek fame or praise. She only wanted justice. She knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but she also knew that moments like this, where truth was exposed and corrupt officials were removed, were necessary steps toward a better system. As she walked out of the office that evening, the city lights shining above her, Maria felt a sense of peace. She had done the right thing, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was why she became an FBI agent in the first place: to protect the innocent, to stand up for those who couldn't, and to ensure that power was never misused again. The city was buzzing with the news. Maria Thompson's arrest of Officer James Callahan had spread like wildfire. Phones were lighting up across Chicago, and people were talking, some in disbelief, others in outrage, and a few in quiet celebration. For many who had long felt powerless against corrupt cops, this moment was like a spark in the dark. The video showed everything: Callahan demanding money, pulling his gun, and then being taken down by someone who could fight back. And not just anyone, someone from the FBI. Maria didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. She tried to go about her usual routine, but reporters waited outside her apartment. Strangers recognized her on the street, and even co-workers gave her looks of respect mixed with curiosity. Some asked how she stayed so calm, how she knew exactly what to do. But for Maria, it wasn't bravery. It was training, discipline, and a deep sense of duty. She had spent years preparing for moments like that. Still, no amount of training could prepare you for the weight of public attention. At FBI headquarters, things were moving fast. Internal Affairs had already begun their investigation into Callahan's past. They started digging through old reports, checking complaints filed against him, and questioning other officers who worked with him. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Callahan had been involved in multiple questionable arrests, false charges, and at least 3 cases where civilians claimed they were mistreated during stops. In every case, nothing came of it. No one believed the victims over a badge. Now, With Maria's testimony and the video evidence, the department had no choice but to act. Callahan was officially charged with attempted extortion, unlawful use of force, and brandishing a weapon in public. His trial date was set, and the pressure on the system to hold him accountable was stronger than ever. But Maria knew this was only the beginning. One bad cop might be off the streets, but the real battle was against the culture that allowed men like Callahan to operate without fear of consequences. Meanwhile, Callahan sat in a holding cell, anger burning behind his eyes. He kept replaying the moment he saw Maria's badge, the way she twisted his arm, the way she looked at him. Not with fear, but disappointment. That look hurt more than the cuffs around his wrists. He had always thought he was untouchable, that, as long as he wore the uniform, he could get away with anything. Now he realized how wrong he was. Back in court, the legal process began. Prosecutors built a strong case, using Maria's statement, the video footage, and the growing list of misconduct claims against Callahan. Defense lawyers tried to paint Maria as an aggressive agent who overreacted, claiming she baited Callahan into drawing his weapon. But the judge wasn't buying it. The facts were clear. Callahan had demanded money, threatened a civilian, and pointed a gun at someone who hadn't done anything wrong. Public opinion turned sharply against him. People who once trusted the badge now questioned whether all officers deserved that trust. Community leaders called for reforms, activists organized protests, and local news stations aired special reports on police corruption. It was a moment that forced the city to confront a truth many had ignored for too long. Inside the police department, tensions ran high. Officers who had known Callahan avoided speaking publicly about him. Some whispered that he was a bad apple, while others feared what would happen if more stories like his came out. The chief of police held a press conference promising transparency and accountability. He vowed to support investigations into any officer suspected of wrongdoing, but Maria knew words alone wouldn't change anything. Real change would come when officers who abused their power were punished, not protected. As the weeks passed, Maria continued her work at the FBI. She helped investigators build cases against other officers connected to Callahan's activities. Some had taken bribes from local businesses, others had covered up illegal searches, and a few had even been accused of planting evidence. Each new name brought another wave of shock and anger from the public. One evening, Maria sat in a small meeting room reviewing files. Her team had gathered enough evidence to charge 2 more officers linked to Callahan's network. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. This kind of work was exhausting. Every file told a story of abuse, of broken trust, of lives affected by greed and fear. But she also knew that exposing these truths was necessary. If they didn't hold people accountable, who would? Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from her mother. "So proud of you, baby. Keep doing the right thing." Maria smiled slightly. Her mother had always supported her, even when she worried about the dangers of the job. She remembered growing up and watching her father, a retired firefighter, talk about honor and service. Those values had shaped her, pushed her to join the FBI, and reminded her why she couldn't stay silent when she saw injustice. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Somewhere, a child laughed. A bus rolled down the street, and a group of teenagers walked past a store window, unaware of the battles being fought behind closed doors. To them, the world seemed normal, but Maria knew better. She had seen the cracks in the system, the places where justice failed, and she had made it her mission to fix them. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. One of her colleagues stepped inside, holding a folder. "We got another witness willing to speak," he said. "She says Callahan threatened her brother last year." Maria nodded and stood up. "Let's bring her in." She grabbed her jacket and headed out, ready to keep fighting. There was still more to uncover, more lies to expose, and more lives to protect. Justice wasn't something you handed out once and forgot. It was something you chased every single day, and Maria Thompson wasn't going to stop chasing it anytime soon. Maria sat in the FBI's interrogation room, watching the one-way glass as the woman on the other side fidgeted with her hands. Her name was Linda Carter, a schoolteacher in her early 30s who had come forward after seeing the news about Callahan. She claimed he had stopped her younger brother for no reason last year and threatened to arrest him unless he paid $500. When her brother refused, Callahan allegedly roughed him up and left bruises across his arms. The family had been too scared to report it, fearing more trouble from the police. Now, with Maria leading the case and public pressure at its peak, Linda had found the courage to speak. As Maria stepped into the room, she gave the woman a calm smile and sat down across from her. "I know this isn't easy," Maria began gently, "but your story could help us stop others from going through what your brother did." Linda nodded, eyes still filled with nervousness. "I just want someone to finally listen," she said. "We didn't think anyone would believe us. We were scared of getting worse treatment if we spoke out." Maria understood that fear all too well. She had seen how silence protected the guilty and punished the innocent. "You're not alone anymore," she assured Linda. "Tell me everything. You remember?" As Linda talked, Maria took notes and asked careful questions. The details lined up with other cases they were building against Callahan and his network. Every word made the case stronger. By the end of the interview, Maria thanked Linda and walked her out, promising full protection if needed. Back at headquarters, Maria met with her team. They were now working on a full report linking Callahan to at least 5 separate incidents involving threats, bribes, and false arrests. One of her colleagues, Agent Ramirez, handed her a new file. "This came in today," he said. "More complaints from people who saw the video and decided to come forward." Maria flipped through the pages. Names, dates, stories of fear and abuse, each one another piece of the puzzle. "This changes everything," she said. "If we can prove these are part of a pattern, we might be able to push for bigger reforms." The next day, Maria attended a closed-door meeting with high-ranking officials from both the FBI and the Chicago Police Department. Tensions ran high as accusations flew, and some officers tried to downplay the seriousness of the findings. "This is an isolated incident," one senior officer argued. "One bad apple doesn't mean the whole system is rotten." Maria leaned forward, her voice firm. 5 documented cases so far. 5 victims who were too afraid to speak until now. If this is isolated, then why haven't we heard from the others? Why haven't these reports been properly investigated? Silence filled the room. Some looked away. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Maria knew what she was saying, hit hard, because it was true. Finally, one of the FBI supervisors spoke. "Agent, Thompson is right. This is more than just one officer. It's a symptom of a larger problem, and we have a duty to fix it." The meeting ended with promises of deeper investigations and internal audits. Maria wasn't sure how much of it would lead to real change, but at least the conversation had started. Outside the office, protests continued. People gathered outside police stations, holding signs like "Justice for All" and "End Corruption." News outlets covered every development, showing footage of Maria taking down Callahan and interviews with victims who finally felt heard. Social media exploded with support. A hashtag, #RealHeroes, began trending, with users sharing stories of good cops and calling out those who abused their power. Maria received messages from young women inspired by her, thanking her for standing up and proving that even the powerful could be held accountable. Despite the attention, Maria remained focused on the work. She spent long hours in meetings, reviewing files, and preparing for the upcoming trial. Callahan's defense team was already trying to paint him as a misunderstood officer who overreacted under stress. But Maria knew better. He had targeted her specifically because he thought she was weak, vulnerable, just another person to control. She reviewed the video again, frame by frame, making sure there was no doubt about what happened. In one clip, she clearly said she was handing over money only for Callahan to pull his gun seconds later. No reasonable argument could justify that action. Meanwhile, Callahan sat in jail, growing angrier by the day. His lawyer visited regularly, trying to negotiate a plea deal, but Callahan refused. He kept insisting he was being framed, that Maria had set him up. He couldn't accept that he had lost control, that he had underestimated someone who looked ordinary but wasn't. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, lawyers whispered among themselves, and members of the public waited anxiously. Maria stood tall in her suit, ready to testify. When called to the stand, she answered each question calmly and clearly. She described the moment Callahan approached her, the way he demanded money, and the split-second decision she made when he pulled his weapon. She showed the judge and jury the video evidence, explaining each detail with precision. Then came Callahan's turn. He sat stiffly, dressed in a borrowed suit, his usual confidence replaced by frustration. His lawyer tried to twist the story, claiming Maria provoked him, that she led him on before attacking. But Maria stayed composed. When given the chance to respond, she simply said, "If I was trying to provoke him, why would I offer him money? Why wouldn't I have drawn my own weapon instead of disarming him?" The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge seemed unconvinced by the defense's claims. After days of testimony and arguments, the verdict was read: guilty on all counts. Callahan was sentenced to prison for 5 years, stripped of his badge, and banned from ever working in law enforcement again. As the IEO gavel struck, Maria let out a quiet breath. Justice had been served for now, but she knew this was only one case. There were still many more corrupt officers out there, hiding behind their uniforms, preying on the powerless. As she walked out of the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters called her name. She ignored them, heading straight for her car. Her phone buzzed with messages, some from friends, others from strangers thanking her. One message caught her eye. It was from a teenager who wrote, "You made me feel like I can fight back too." Maria smiled slightly. That's what this was all about. Not fame, not revenge, but giving people hope. Hope that justice could win. Hope that truth mattered. And hope that even the most powerful could be held accountable. As she drove off into the city, Maria knew her job wasn't done. There were still battles ahead, still stories waiting to be told, and still lives worth protecting. And she would keep fighting for them, one case at a time. Maria stepped out of the courthouse, the warm afternoon sun hitting her face as reporters rushed forward with cameras and microphones. She had just watched James Callahan sentenced to prison, but instead of feeling relief, she felt a deep weight settle in her chest. Justice had been done, yes, but what about all the others who hadn't come forward? What about those still too afraid to speak? She kept walking, ignoring the shouts of reporters asking for comments. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from her supervisor. "Good work today, but this is far from over." She knew he was right. Back at FBI headquarters, Maria met with her team in the briefing room. The walls were covered in whiteboards filled with names, dates, and notes. Callahan's case had opened the floodgates. More victims were coming forward, more officers were being named, and Internal Affairs was now under pressure to investigate every claim. "This changes everything," said Agent Ramirez, flipping through a stack of new reports. "We've got people talking who never would have before." Maria nodded slowly. "And we can't let this die down. We need to keep pushing." Her team worked late into the night, building cases against other officers connected to Callahan. Some had accepted bribes, others had lied in reports to cover up misconduct. Every file they reviewed painted a picture of a broken system where power was abused and silence was enforced. One name came up again and again: Officer Daniel Reyes. He had worked closely with Callahan for years and was known in the department for his aggressive tactics during stops. Maria read through his records and saw patterns similar to Callahan's behavior: complaints of excessive force, false arrests, and intimidation. Yet no real action had ever been taken. "We need to bring him in," Maria said, closing the file. "If we can prove he was part of Callahan's network, we might be able to expose how deep this goes." The next day, Maria led a small team to Reyes's home. It was early morning when they knocked on his door. He answered, looking tired, eyes red from lack of sleep. When he saw Maria, his face went cold. "Agent Thompson," he said, voice tight. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk," she replied, holding up a warrant. "Step outside, please." Reyes hesitated, then did as he was told. As agents searched his home, Maria questioned him on his connection to Callahan. At first, he denied knowing anything, but when presented with witness statements and financial records showing suspicious transactions, his story started to crack. "I didn't know what he was doing," Reyes finally admitted. "I mean, I suspected, but I figured it wasn't my problem unless it affected me." Maria leaned forward. "That's exactly how corruption survives. People look away until someone gets hurt." He looked away, shame flashing across his face. Later that day, Reyes was suspended pending investigation. His badge was taken, and his name was added to the growing list of officers under scrutiny. As news spread, public trust in the police continued to erode. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, demanding reforms and transparency. Local leaders held emergency meetings, trying to manage the fallout. Some called for an independent review board to oversee police conduct, while others argued that the entire department needed to be restructured. Maria found herself at the center of it all. Reporters followed her everywhere, asking if this was the start of real change. Activists reached out, wanting to use her story to push for policy shifts. Even politicians wanted to meet with her, hoping to align themselves with the growing movement for justice. But Maria wasn't interested in politics or fame. She was focused on the truth. One evening, after a long day of interviews and meetings, she sat alone in a quiet diner across town. The waitress brought her coffee without asking, recognizing her from the news. A few people glanced her way but didn't approach. She appreciated the space. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Linda Carter, the woman who had spoken about her brother. "Thank you for believing me. For the first time, I feel like my voice matters." Maria smiled slightly and typed back, "Your voice always mattered. I'm just glad people are finally listening." She took a sip of coffee and stared out the window. The city moved on around her, unaware of the battles being fought behind closed doors. Somewhere, another officer was deciding whether to abuse their power or do the right thing. Another victim was weighing whether to come forward. Another young person was watching her story unfold and wondering if they could make a difference too. She thought about how she used to feel when she was younger, how powerless she sometimes felt when she saw injustice and didn't know how to fight it. Now she understood that change didn't come from one big moment. It came from standing up, speaking out, and refusing to stay silent. Her phone buzzed once more. This time it was a message from her mother. "I saw you on TV today. So proud of you. You're making a difference." Maria's chest tightened. She missed her family, missed the simple days when she didn't have to carry the weight of so many stories. But she also knew this was her calling. She finished her coffee, paid the bill, and walked out into the cool night air. The city stretched before her, full of life, pain, hope, and struggle. And somewhere in the middle of it all, she was still fighting, because justice wasn't something you won once and forgot. It was something you protected every single day, and Maria Thompson wasn't going to stop protecting it. The city was still buzzing with the fallout from Callahan's trial and Reyes's suspension. News stations replayed Maria's testimony, showing her calm yet firm voice as she described how a man in uniform had tried to scare her into paying money. The video of her taking him down played on loop, shared across social media by people who saw it not just as justice, but as proof that even the powerful could be held accountable. But for Maria, the real work was just beginning. She sat at her desk inside FBI headquarters, surrounded by stacks of files and reports. Each one told a story, some of abuse, others of silence, many of fear. Her team had gathered enough evidence to charge 3 more officers linked to Callahan's network. These weren't just random names. They were men who had been trusted to protect the public yet used their power to harm and control. Maria rubbed her eyes, exhaustion creeping in after another long day. She hadn't slept well since the trial ended. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the victims, their fear, their hesitation, the moment they finally decided to speak up. She knew this fight wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about making sure others like them never felt powerless again. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Agent Ramirez. "We've got another witness. Says he worked with Callahan years ago and knows more than what we've uncovered." Maria sat up straighter. This was the kind of lead they needed. If someone from the inside was willing to talk, it could expose even deeper layers of corruption. She arrived at the meeting point, a small, quiet cafe near the riverfront. The witness, a former officer named Thomas Green, was already waiting. He looked older than his years, tired and nervous. Maria sat across from him, offering a calm smile. "You don't have to worry," she said gently. "We're here to listen." Thomas nodded, hands shaking slightly as he sipped his coffee. "I heard about what you did with Callahan," he said. "That took guts." Maria gave a small shrug. It was the right thing to do. He looked around before leaning in closer. "What I'm about to tell you, it goes higher than you think." Maria's ears perked up. "Go on." Thomas took a deep breath. Callahan wasn't working alone. There was a whole group within the department. Officers who would target people, mostly minorities, immigrants, or anyone they thought wouldn't fight back. They'd demand protection money, plant drugs during stops, make false arrests if people didn't cooperate. Maria's stomach tightened. And no one stopped them? Thomas shook his head. Some captains knew. Some even approved. If you raised concerns, you were warned to stay out of it. Or worse, you were transferred, demoted, or forced out. This was bigger than she had imagined. Not just a few bad cops, but an entire system built on silence and fear. "Why are you telling me this now?" Maria asked. Thomas looked down at his hands. "Because I stayed silent for too long. I watched good people suffer while I did nothing. And now seeing what you did, it made me realize I can't keep living with that guilt." Maria leaned forward. "You coming forward could help us stop this. But we need details, names, dates, anything you remember." For the next hour, Thomas spoke. He gave Maria names of officers involved, locations where deals were made, and even records of cases that had been altered to cover up misconduct. It was everything Maria had hoped for, and more. After the meeting, she returned to headquarters and immediately called a team meeting. They spread out across the room, pinning new notes to the board. More names, more stories, more proof. "This changes everything," Ramirez said, flipping through the documents. "If we can prove these claims, we might be able to bring down an entire division." Maria nodded, determination burning in her chest. "Then let's make sure we do it right." Over the next few weeks, Maria led a full-scale investigation into the claims. She worked late nights, met with witnesses, and reviewed old case files that had suspicious gaps. With every piece of evidence, the picture became clearer. This wasn't just a handful of corrupt cops, it was a pattern, protected by those in power who turned a blind eye. Meanwhile, public pressure continued to grow. Protests expanded beyond Chicago, with activists calling for nationwide reforms. Social media filled with hashtags demanding transparency, accountability, and justice. People were watching Maria's story unfold, inspired by the idea that one person could make a difference. One evening, as Maria walked home, she noticed a group of teenagers standing outside a community center. One of them recognized her and waved. "Hey, Agent Thompson," he called out. "You're the one who took down that crooked cop, right?" Maria smiled slightly. "Yeah, that was me." The boy grinned. "Man, that was awesome. My cousin was pulled over last year by some guy like that. He didn't say anything because he was scared, but now maybe he will." Maria crouched down so she was at his level. "You know what matters most?" she said. "Speaking up when you see something wrong, even if it's hard." The boy nodded seriously. "I will." As Maria walked away, she felt a small sense of peace. Maybe all of this, the sleepless nights, the pressure, the battles, was worth it. Because if her actions gave someone else the courage to stand up, then she had done her job. Back at the office, Maria prepared for the next phase of the investigation. They had enough evidence to request formal hearings, internal audits, and federal oversight. It was going to be messy, and there would be pushback. But Maria wasn't afraid. She stood in front of the whiteboard, staring at the list of names. One by one, they would fall. And when they did, maybe, just maybe, the system would start to change. She picked up her pen and added another name to the board. There was still more to uncover, more lies to expose, more lives to protect. And Maria Thompson wasn't going to stop until justice was served, for everyone. The city was changing. It wasn't overnight and it wasn't perfect, but something had shifted. People who once felt powerless now believed they could speak up. Maria Thompson had become a symbol of that change, though she never wanted to be. She still went to work every day, still reviewed files, still chased the truth like she always had. But now, her name carried weight. Her actions had lit a fire, and it was burning brighter than ever. Inside FBI headquarters, Maria sat across from a room full of officials, FBI supervisors, city leaders, internal affairs investigators. They were reviewing the latest findings, from her team's investigation into the corrupt network within the police department. The list of officers involved had grown. So had the evidence. What started with Callahan had led to more than a dozen names, each tied to illegal activity, abuse of power or cover-ups. "This is bigger than we thought," one of the senior agents said, flipping through the reports. "We're looking at systemic failure here." Maria nodded. "That's exactly what it is. And if we don't act now, people will keep getting hurt." Her voice was calm, but firm. She didn't raise it to make a point. She didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew how serious this was. The pressure on the department was growing. Lawsuits were being filed by victims. City officials were under scrutiny. Even the mayor had made a public statement about reforming law enforcement practices. Outside, the streets were filled with signs of change. Protesters still gathered, but now there were also community meetings, town halls where people shared their experiences and demanded better. Schools invited Maria to speak. Students asked questions. Young women looked up to her. Some even told her they wanted to join the FBI because of what she did. But Maria knew real change wouldn't come from just removing bad cops. It would come from rebuilding trust, holding leadership accountable, and making sure systems existed to prevent corruption from taking root again. Back at the office, she met with Linda Carter again, the school teacher who had first spoken out about her brother's experience with Callahan. Had become an advocate for victims' rights. She helped organize support groups, worked with legal aid clinics, and gave interviews urging others not to stay silent. "You've done something amazing," Linda told Maria as they walked out of the building together. "People feel like they can finally fight back." Maria smiled slightly. They always could. They just needed someone to believe them. As they parted ways, Maria headed home. The city lights flickered above her, casting long shadows on the pavement. She passed a small group of teenagers standing near a bus stop. One of them recognized her. "Hey," he called out. "You're that FBI agent, right?" She turned, raising an eyebrow. "Maybe." He grinned. "Man, you took down that cop like it was nothing. That was crazy." Maria chuckled. "It wasn't nothing. It took training and courage." The boy looked thoughtful. "I want to do something like that someday." Maria studied him for a moment. He couldn't have been older than 16. Probably saw the video online, maybe heard his parents talk about it. But something about the way he said it, "I want to do something like that someday," made her heart warm. "Then do it," she said simply. "Learn the law, study hard, protect people. Don't wait for someone else to fix things. Be the one who does it." He nodded seriously. "I will." As Maria walked away, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She had spent years chasing justice, exposing lies and facing powerful forces that tried to silence her. But now she saw something different. Not just anger, not just fear. Hope. Hope that the next generation would grow up in a world where no one had to live in fear of the badge, where people trusted the system to protect them, not harm them. Where speaking up wasn't dangerous, it was encouraged. Few days later, another trial began. This time it was for Officer Daniel Reyes, the second officer Maria had taken down after Callahan. His case was similar: extortion, abuse of power, false arrests. But unlike Callahan, Reyes didn't try to deny everything. He admitted guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence. He apologized to the victims, though Maria knew words alone wouldn't undo the damage. Still, it was progress. As she left the courthouse, reporters surrounded her again. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "Agent Thompson, do you think this is the start of real change?" She paused, thinking carefully before answering. "I hope so," she said. "But change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when people stand together, when they refuse to stay silent, when they demand better. I'm just one part of that. There's still a lot of work to do." She walked off, leaving the reporters behind. In the distance, a new headline scrolled across a digital billboard: "Real justice, real change." She kept walking, because justice wasn't a finish line. It was a path, and Maria Thompson wasn't done walking it. There were still stories waiting to be uncovered. Still lives worth protecting. Still battles to fight, and she would keep fighting, one case, one voice, one truth at a time.